All right, welcome everybody. I know we still have a few people coming in, but we can get started here. My name is Lex Vranick. I am a horror author and the founder of Write and Wine, which is a writing and mental health community online. And I am here to moderate our plotting versus pantsing panel. So to kick us off, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. When I call your name, if you can just give us a little bit about yourself and let us know if you consider yourself a plotter or a pantser, just so that we can kind of see where we all land. Personally, I'm somewhere in the middle. If we could start with KL Bone.
Hi, I'm KL Bone. I'm an author of dark fantasy and paranormal romance. I also have a master's degree in literature, and I'm working on a PhD in creative writing. I would consider myself somewhere in the middle, though I do tend to lean toward plotting. I write a pretty extensive series, and the deeper I get into a series, the more outlining I find that I require in order to write a story.
Awesome. And congratulations on going for that PhD. I know that that's a lot of hard work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we have Laura Nettles.
I'm Laura. I am up here in Toronto, Canada. I write mostly horror. I have about 25 stories that are in anthologies and magazines out there. My collection comes out in May. And yeah, I have done novel length stories. None of them are published yet. And so I find that the length of the story dictates the pantsing versus the plotting for me of what I lean towards. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very fair. Definitely. I think that sometimes the story can kind of decide for us what it needs.
Yeah.
And we also have Sienna Frost here with us.
สวัสดีค่ะ Hi, I go by many names. Some people know me as Faye, Sienna Frost, or Kajon One is my real name. I'm Thai. So hello from Bangkok. I've been writing for about 30 years. I just published my first book in 2021. I am a pantser. I've always been a pantser from day one. A chronic one at that. I usually don't know the next paragraph. Usually it's because I get bored and then I don't finish the book if I think ahead at all. So that's me.
That is very fair. I can absolutely relate to that. Sometimes you plan too much and then it kind of gets in your head. And then last but not least, we have KJ Harwick.
Hello, I am the author, or I'm KJ Harwick. I'm author of the Hidden Flames Artifact series. I've been trying to work on book 2 for a couple of years, or for a year, and it's just, we're in the long run right now. So I'm trying to pick my brain on other things. Anyway, I find that as far as how I write, I'm sort of everything everywhere all at once. Like, it depends on the day, it depends on the mood, it depends on what I'm working on. Sometimes I can vomit words onto a page because I need to get them out of my head. Sometimes I need to outline, sometimes I have to build, sometimes I have to create graphic art to be able to visualize with my eyes what I'm seeing in my head. So, I mean, looking at this dichotomy as a whole spectrum or a whole circle, it's sort of, I'm everywhere, and then I just have to touch down wherever I need to be in that moment.
Nice. I like that. I like that a lot. So I think that we can kind of combine these first 2 questions into one, because it kind of ties into how everybody sort of answered in, you kind of do a little bit of both. And I think that we all sort of do a little bit of both. So what might be the advantages and disadvantages of plotting and or pantsing? If we could start with Laura.
So I write a lot of drabbles, so 100-word stories, where you don't need an intensive encyclopedia of the entire world that this story is taking place in. So it's very easy to just pants and just explore the moment, explore the emotion. you don't need to know what type of spaceship, who built it, what type of shoelaces the astronaut has. But I find that when I do more of a short story, I do enjoy having more of like a couple of bullet points of like, this is the general flow of the story that I would like, or the type of relationship I would like to explore. And then the first novel I ever did, I actually did plot embryos, which are the story circle with interior change, exterior change, and things like that. So plot embryos are greatly helpful for trying to like help you figure out the internal conflict of the character, what it is that is their misbelief that needs to change, what is their comfort zone, and how do they get out of their comfort zone. And yeah, so it just depends on the length of the story for me on which thing I go for. If I'm doing a flash piece, sometimes I'll just pull up a painting and use that for a prompt and just set up a timer, go for half an hour, and just have a story explode on the page based on a painting. So nothing outlines, just go for it. So
Awesome.
lots of different styles. Sometimes I'll pull tarot cards and use those for an outline.
Oh, that's very cool. I like that. Very different. And I like the plot embryos idea too. I hadn't heard of that before. Thank you. Sienna?
It's difficult because I haven't done a lot of outlining. I've tried once or twice. I feel like that's a method that would probably get you writing or finish writing faster because you know exactly where you're going. But I never got through any book. I never finished any book when I outline because I just get bored and then I don't finish them. So, but to me, I love pantsing because it really, for one thing, it feels like watching a TV series where you're just waiting for the next episode. So I wake up every day totally excited to know what's going to happen next because I don't. So that sort of motivates me to write every day. I don't ever feel like it's a chore because I really want to know who is going to do what next. And every paragraph is an adventure to me. I think another thing that I really like, it sort of trains you to look back a lot. I feel that I make fewer plot holes actually when I pants, because instead of going from point A to point B where you might leave something out because you're just trying to get there as fast as possible, because I don't know what happens next, I have to build everything from the past. So I find myself going back to reread what I've written and then build from there. So everything that's new has a foundation from what I've written before. So I find that I don't have much of a problem of plot holes. And also because I'm a web novel writer, I've been a web novel writer, so I post every chapter once I'm done. There is no way, once they have been read, you cannot just go back because there are hundreds of people have read it. So I tread very carefully when I pants. It's a very good habit, but that's also why I don't have much of a plot hole problem, because I keep having to go back and build from what I've written. So I think that's one advantage that I find pantsing really useful. Also, it produces a different kind of story because, you know, when you outline, you have a story you have a beginning, a middle, an end that's satisfying. When you pants, it doesn't have to conclude. It doesn't have to be satisfying in the usual way. It's more like a journey where you try to bring out what's entertaining about every point of the character's life. And I think that's the strength of pantsing, because you're not so fixated on where the character is going as much as making them interesting all the time. right now during the chapter that you're writing. So I think they just produce different kinds of stories to me. Yeah.
I like that perspective a lot because I feel like a lot of people can look at pantsing and be like, oh, you're going to be riddled with plot holes because you don't know where the story is supposed to go. But I like that you bring that sense of awareness to it, because I think that you kind of need to have that. You need to know where you are in the story in order to move forward. That's a really great perspective. Thank you.
I believe that's the requirement of successful pantsing, because you can't just move forward without looking back. It's like living for the future without ever learning from your past mistakes, right?
Yes.
Pantsing is pretty much like living to me, because you don't know the future, you have to go through it anyway, and all you can do is learn from what you've done and then make a better future out of it. So yeah, that's the way I see pantsing.
I like that. That's awesome. KJ?
Can you repeat the original question for me?
Yes, of course. The advantages and disadvantages of plotting and or pantsing.
Oh, okay. Honestly, I don't think that either one really has a disadvantage if you can lean into it in a way that benefits the story and sort of works for you. You know, if you're on one end of the spectrum and you're kind of just vomiting up words, you know, it's a really intense space where you can feel all those emotions of the character you're trying to write about. You can feel all the sensations and the weather of the surrounding, and it sort of gives you a chance to be in that moment with that character as you explore what's happening over the next few, you know, the next few lines or the next few paragraphs or pages, or, you know, so there's a strong connection that comes when you're just sort of, I hesitate to say this, but kind of channeling your character onto the page. So, but, you know, and then on the other side of the spectrum, you know, you've got this building set, an outline, and I think that's really important too. Sometimes you have to step back from those emotions and the now moment and sort of look at, okay, what story am I really trying to tell? Yeah, character A is over here crying her eyes out. She's waking up in this battlefield and she's scarred and bloodied and everybody's dead, but why? You know, what are all the factors that contributed to this moment that was so important to her? And so outlining kind of gives you a chance to sort of step away from all of that intensity and look at what's happening around the world, and how do I take all of these elements and structure them in such a way that I can really build a strong foundation for the story. You know, when the character's waking up in this field, okay, this thing happened, but why is this the important moment in the beginning? What happens at the end that sort of reflects this and this journey that she's about to go on? So outlining really gives you a chance to look at that and all those critical steps along the way. When did they find the next piece in the puzzle? When were they locked into this adventure that they really can't get out of? You know, when did they really start growing as a character and saying, I'm tired of being kicked around, I want to start fighting now? You know, even if it's just fighting by staying silent, I want to do something. So yeah, they both have a lot of advantages, but I think it's really where you are in your revision process, in your storytelling, and then you have to pick up that particular tool on that portion of the spectrum to sort of say, okay, this is what I'm going to work on today.
I love that.
Jump back in a little.
Yeah, no, I love referring to them as tools rather than like thinking of them as completely separate, like preparation models or writing models. I like that idea of using them as tools. Thank you.
Thanks.
And KL?
I think that there are a few advantages and some disadvantages. When talking about pantsing, I tend to find that there's a lot of freedom in pantsing. You don't know exactly where the story's going to go, which can be exciting for the reader as well, or sorry, for the writer as well. And if you're halfway through a story and you get a cool idea, you can just run after it and try different directions and different things. I think the disadvantage is that if you don't know what happens next in the story and you reach the end of a scene, it could possibly slow the writing process a little bit as you try and sit there and figure out, okay, what happens next? There's 5 different directions that could come after this scene, but you have to sit there and think about it and go, okay, if this happens, what's the consequence or the advantage? If I want to go in this other direction, what happens next? With plotting, you have an outline and a guide in front of you. So when you reach the end of a scene, you look at your outline and you go, oh, yeah, that's what happens next. So it can help to kind of speed up the writing process a little bit by doing the work at the beginning to decide what happens next. I would say that one of the disadvantages of plotting may be that the story can become rigid. And if you come up with an equally cool idea, or maybe even a slightly better idea for what happens next, you might be more reluctant to do it because you spent all that time and work making an outline that you would be deviating from. And also that change might require other changes to the outline because you're going down a different path. And that would mean that you spend a lot of work at the beginning and end up not using that work and the time that was spent because you go in a different direction if you abandon that outline. So freedom versus kind of the possibility of being rigid, and then having a guidebook versus the possibility of not knowing what comes next. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both methods.
I like that a lot. And I think something that I've often said is, especially with pantsing, the advantage is often anything can happen, and the disadvantage is also anything can happen. And I like that you kind of bring up that the same thing can kind of be true of plotting, where yes, you know exactly what comes next, but you also know exactly what's supposed to come next.
Exactly.
Okay. Regardless of your personal planning style, is there anything that you feel that you have to know before you jump into writing a new story? If we could start with Sienna.
Anything I need to know. To me, it's always started with characters that I'm interested in writing, the relationship. I'm not sure if that is going to be the same for every book I write, but so far it's always been, oh, I want to write this kind of relationship between these two people, whether it's lovers, brothers, parents, and then I start from that. I start building the world because I'm a pantser, so I start with just one single idea, and then I thought, okay, if I want this relationship, for example, Obsidian, this series that I'm writing right now, it started with a chosen one, which is a girl, and her swan sword. And I wanted that relationship and the conflicts. And then I build the world around it. I find excuses to make them that way. And then the conflicts after, and all the world building was built after that around them. So to me, I would say the characters that I'm interested in writing, that's what I really need to begin writing a book.
That makes sense. You need to know who you're writing about before you start the work. Definitely. KJ?
For me, I need some kind of a snapshot, that first seed of an idea, whether it's a character or whether it's a concept. It started out where it used to be just about characters, because I worked so long and so hard trying to figure out characterization when in my early writing years. But nowadays sometimes I'll just get this idea of, oh, it would be cool if we kind of combine this horrible thing with this horrible thing that just makes it like 3 times more horrible. How could I make that into something fun or silly, and it's just starting there. And that's where the word vomit and the pantsing comes in, is like, okay, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I'm going to write 100 words and kind of see how it feels, or I'm going to see if maybe something else crops up. And if nothing else crops up for another day or two, then I just take kind of that idea or that moment and I'll put it in my book list or my backlog. And that way it's something that I can go back to later, maybe in 5 years, 10 years or something, and go, oh, this was a neat concept. I have more ideas about this now. So it's really just about that first snapshot, something coming in. And if it doesn't work out in that moment, that's fine, because it's going to work out eventually.
I
You're
like
going to
that a
find a
lot.
place for it. So keep everything.
I like that a lot. And yes, I 100% agree. Keep everything. If you write something that you're not 100% sure belongs in the story, just stick it in another Word document and save it, because you don't know when that's gonna
Exactly.
be valuable to you. That's awesome. Great. KL?
Most of my books are either based on mythologies, or they have a complete fantasy setting. Setting and myth are where I tend to start with a book. I like to build up fantasy worlds, or I like to choose a location and focus on the myths associated with that location. And my characters kind of come second to the world building and to the mythology that I want to explore. My dark fantasy series is fae-based in Irish myth. I have a couple of fairy tale stories. So you kind of have the, one's Red Riding Hood, one's Rapunzel. So you kind of have that structure and the myths that it comes from. And then I also do a lot of traveling. So I was touring Scotland and heard a story about Selkies on the Isle of Skye. And that myth inspired Immortal Sky, which is one of my Selkie vampire books. So for me, it's really about building a fantasy world or choosing a location first. And once I have that, then I can start going, okay, what kind of people would have been in the area? Or if it's fantasy, what kind of creatures are in the world? What kind, is this fae or dragons or elves, or what goes into this world? And then once you have the characters, so mythology, setting, characters, and then you start figuring out the actual storyline. That's kind of my process. So
I like that a lot. There's a lot of, and I see a similarity, but also a difference in the way that you, KL, build out your stories versus how Sienna does it, where Sienna's starting with the character and building out, and you're starting with the world and populating it. So there's all these different ways that we can kind of create our own stories and figure out where we are in the world and who we're writing about. I like that a lot. Laura?
Usually I start with a single word and just extrapolate from there. So I'm on live streams a lot for writers where we'll be doing writing sprints. And so I'll ask the host or the chat, like, just throw out a word. And like one word they gave me was perpetuate. And so I just had the word perpetuate in my brain. I was like, okay, maybe that's like a chain breaker. Somebody wants to be a chain breaker in the family to get out of a certain trauma cycle and can't. And so I put my hands on the page and on the keyboard, and it's like, okay, I'll just start describing a setting that somebody who wants to be a chain breaker is in, and it just starts flowing from there. So usually it starts with a word. Another one was zombie. And so I was describing a dance floor where drugged people were like zombies, and it turned into a vampire was there to like take some of them out, and that just snowballed, and now it's a vampire romance possible trilogy. So like I don't know what happens. It just usually starts with a word and it just unrolls from there.
That's great though, because language really is such a powerful thing. I mean, it's what we all sort of deal in our craft. And so starting with just a simple word and seeing where your brain takes that is a really, really cool thing.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Thank you, Laura. So I'm going to ask one more question before we jump into the audience questions. I know I saw a few come in, but if anyone else in the audience has any questions, pop them into the chat. We're going to be going through them soon. But my last question for everybody is, do you feel that there are certain genres or types of stories, or even just a part of the writing process where pantsing versus plotting is better or more useful. If we could start with KJ.
I don't write memoir, but I suspect that vomiting words onto a page would be much easier than trying to outline your memories. So, I write a lot of really dark science fiction, and I hope to lean a little bit more into horror in that way. But I find that it's beneficial to at least have a general idea of how you want your system to work, your tech or your magic or both, or sort of just kind of an idea. You need to have that. I don't want to say outline your tech, but in a way, outline your tech. You know, at least write bullet points. How does it work? Does it influence people? Is it bought and sold like a commodity? Can it be, is it attached to the body, or can it be submerged into the body? You know, there's lots of different ways to look at things. So I don't know, I'm trying to round my thoughts out here, but I think for the most part, there are a few genres where it might lean heavily one way or another with certain elements to use the right tools to lean into. But for the most part, it's just, like I said, tool-based system. What are we doing today? What do we want to focus on? Let's lean into that tool. Maybe we're just building the blocks, you know, of a plot, or maybe we're, I don't know, just building out fashion styles for that particular world or that particular culture. You know, which tool do you use to lean into that? So it's kind of an ambiguous answer I'm giving, so maybe.
No, I think that that's definitely fair. And it's kind of a question that lends itself to ambiguous answers. But I do agree with you that as far as memoir writing goes, it probably feels a bit more natural to approach it almost like a journaling session instead of trying to create a story out of your own memories and your own life.
Yeah.
KL?
I don't think there's a necessarily definitive answer as to genre, because every writer approaches things differently. But from my personal experience, I find that where plotting is very important to me is with anything historical. My dark fantasy has historical settings, and I try and be accurate with clothing, with what food would have been in particular locations. A ton of research at the beginning, and also outlining historical events if I'm going to talk about any of them. So I need to know in a timeline, where does this event occur and which portions am I writing in? And I need to make sure that it all stays in line so that I don't have an event happen in the wrong year or the wrong time, or have clothing out of place if I want to be accurate. And also I would say with fantasy, I write massive worlds. I have massive series. I'm working on book 7 in my Black Rose series right now. I have a ton of characters, a ton of creatures, a ton of past events. So for me, being on book 7, if I don't outline, I'm going to forget something. I'm going to lose a plot line, or a character is going to show up in book 5 who died in book 2. So that's really, I think for me, fantasy and historical, anything that involves a lot of research or extensive world building lends itself to plotting for me. My other thing is that I have some co-writes. And I find that when I'm co-writing, plotting is also very important to keep both authors on the same page, and to be able to intermingle scenes and make sure that especially if we're writing separate characters, that those characters show up together at the right time, at the right place. Otherwise, we're going to be on different pages and the story becomes messy, and it's going to take a lot of work to get the characters back on the same page. So on the other side, I write some paranormal romance with contemporary settings. I find that I don't have to plot those quite as much. It's kind of, I like to play with romance and kind of see where the story goes with that, and get, put some really emotional the love scenes and the intimate scenes as they feel natural throughout the story's progression.
That's great. Awesome. That's a great point about working with a co-writer. There definitely needs to be some level of plotting there. Otherwise, you're both kind of just scrambling. Absolutely. Laura?
So I find that if I have a story where it's like a single POV and specifically first person POV, you only know what that character knows. And so other characters will blip in and out. And if it seems like the world is revolving around your main character and the other characters aren't doing anything when they're off page, I find that outlining a table of who's doing what, where, which chapter across the different characters can be very helpful to make sure that the characters have more depth. They do exist on their own. They're not just a tool for the main character. So that can help. With horror, Tim Wagner wrote a book called Writing in the Dark, and in it he outlines the 10 different endings of horror stories that he has found, and they are excellent. And I find that when I start writing a horror, if I can pick what type of ending and aim for that, that can help have a trajectory without an explicit outline, just so I can know, is my main character going to succumb to the evil? Are they going to become the evil? Are they going to be scarred? Are they going to take others down with them? Like, what type of thing am I aiming for? My major was animation. And so there's 2 different styles of animation. There's pose to pose, which is basically outlining where I want to hit this and I want to hit this. And then there is straight ahead animation, which is basically pantsing, where I want to start with this pose and then whatever happens, happens. And so what I find best is a mixture of the 2, where I want this big plot beat to happen and this big plot beat to happen, and whatever happens in the middle happens in the middle. And so it has a more organic feel of exploring different types of like emotions or avenues in the plot. And I'm still hitting my big major beats, but I am morphing the clay in the middle and just having fun with it. And so I don't get bored with the story. You can also do things like characterization brainstorms on like why your character thinks the way they think, and create a story Bible. Instead of just having outline, you can have an outline and a story Bible, or just a story Bible. There's also this thing that I am doing right now called reverse outline, which is where you have already pantsed your story and now it needs a redraft because you've had some epiphanies. And so you're going through and outlining what you already did and then tinkering in those bones, and then you're going to re-outline again. So yeah.
I like that. And I see Diana has put in the link for Writing in the Dark, which I was going to say is also one of my favorite books on the craft. So anyone, even if you're not a horror author, I think that it's just a really interesting read if anybody is interested in that. And thank you for teaching us a little bit about animation, because that's something that I did not know as well. So I love being able to learn about other mediums. Sienna?
I think it depends on the kind of story you really want to write. I think both techniques can, once you get really good at it, can pull off any genre. And one of the best analogy I find for pantsing versus plotting, planning is traveling. I find when you're pantsing is like when you're an explorer, right? You go to this unknown place, you know very little about it, and then you just go and face whatever comes. And that creates a different kind of adventure. And I've argued with a follower before that you can't do that with mystery. And that's interesting because in a way, when you look at it, it sounds logical that you cannot do that with mystery, because you might want to really plan out the mystery part and resolving it in the end. but I've also created a mysterious character many times where I don't even know what he wants until the very end. And then by using the method of going back and looking at what I've written, what he's done, I can pull off that kind of mystery as well. So even for mystery, to me, I can do that with, by pantsing. But then again, if you would like a story that feels fulfilling, or more like an organized tour or a trip where you want it to be, I want this to be a romantic trip where you hit certain places and you really want the overall enjoyment to be this kind and not that kind. I believe that's where our outlining comes in and probably works better than pantsing, because you don't want, if you're on a honeymoon, you don't want to go like an explorer. That could probably ruin it. It depends on, when you travel, you have sort of an idea of what kind of trip you want. I do go on all kinds of trips. I do go like an explorer. Sometimes I backpack, sometimes I plan, sometimes I go on an anniversary, honeymoonish kind of trip. They're all different. And for those honeymoon trips, I take honeymoons every year. So that's why I say that it's still the same man. Yeah, but for those trips, I plan out everything. I would book restaurants in advance, and I find that similar to outlining, because you don't want stuff to go wrong. You just want a relaxing, fulfilling kind of trip. But when you want an adventure, I go the pantser way. You don't plan anything. You expect to mess up along the way and find that fun. So to me, it's not really genre, because every genre you can have different kinds of stories within that subset. So it depends on the kind of entertainment you want to give yourself or the reader. And I love that we call it a tool. Like, that's if you see it as a tool, then you just really have to know which tool is best for which kind of story that you're trying to write. So I don't think there's any difference really. Depends on what
I
you
like
wanna
that travel analogy a lot. I think that it really works, because it's something that it's something very tangible that you can think about, right? Do I want to plan out every beat of my trip, or do I want to just go and see where I end up?
And they can come off pleasant, both of them, just different kinds of trips, and the same person or the same readers can enjoy both kinds of trips. You don't have to stick with one, really.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to move into audience questions now. I know we've got a couple, but as we go through, if anybody thinks of anything, just put it into the chat. I'll keep looking in there. The first one that we have is from, and I'm also trying my best with everybody's names, so I'm trying. First, we have Al, I believe. How does everyone on the panel work with themes and symbolism? Particularly, how can this work with a pantser approach? Is there anybody that would like to take a crack at this one first?
I think with a pantser approach, it's sort of the same as stepping inside your character and sort of being in that moment. So when you're in that moment and you're feeling what they're feeling and you're discovering and experiencing what they're experiencing, what symbolism is coming to you from that world, and how is it impacting your character? So maybe they see a flower and it doesn't, symbol, and it doesn't mean anything. But if they see 3 spears on a separate flag, all of a sudden that pulls a different reaction. And so you can go, okay, you can kind of stop there and go, okay, what's the difference here? Besides one being a flower and one being 3 spears, what's the difference in the symbology here in this world, and why is it impacting my character? And that's when you start asking why. Kind of talk to your character or see what's going on with them. But if you keep asking why did you react this way to this one? Why did you react this way to this one? And then you can unlock those symbols and see if maybe they have a bigger meaning. Maybe in that moment it's small, but as you get 4 or 5 moments down the road, all of a sudden that experience starts making connections. So hopefully that helps.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Also, I have to step away. Something just came up. So thank you everybody for coming. If you have other questions, feel free to put them in the Discord chat and I'll try to answer them later today. So,
Thank you, KJ. It's been great having you.
bye. Nice seeing everyone.
Would anybody else like to jump on this themes and symbolism question before we move on?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
So I find that with my themes or symbols, it usually comes up more with repetition, like something that comes up multiple times in the story. And it can start as something innocuous, and then with each time they see it, it reinforces something in their mind, or the meaning behind it changes as they grow and mature or something like that. And so I find that like in one of my Gothic romance stories, there's the idea of seeing ghosts of the past and like being haunted by your past. And so, and having to let go of the past. And so the theme was like, even trees let go of the dead leaves. And so you got to do that with your own life. And so her brother died, her family moved on, and her husband died, but she can't be like that tree. She can't move on. And so, of course, she body snatches her dead husband from the cemetery so she can get haunted by his ghost and they can be together. But like, as you do. So
You do what you got to do.
exactly. So sometimes you can have that theme and then turn it on its head at the end, or you can have like, so that theme I actually wove in from an anthology prompt, which was the trees. And so I wove the trees in after I had written it to make it more poignant. But sometimes I will have the theme like perpetuate as my word and extrapolate the whole story from the theme. So it can go either way. Yeah.
I like that. And that's a really beautiful analogy, by the way, with the trees. I like that a lot.
You know, to me, how I deal with that as a pantser is that I don't decide ahead of time what theme or symbolism I want to write about, but I treat it more like living every day, where you know how you go through life, you sit down and you suddenly realize, oh, what happens to me now has a meaning. When you look back, it's meant to be this way. And I do that a lot in my stories. I look back and I bring back something from the past that defines the character, like something defines me. For example, there was a point, I'm a computer science major, and at one point I took an English 101 class in college, and the professor wanted me to change my major to English because he was really impressed with my short stories. And I didn't, because my parents weren't supportive of the decision. And to this day, I feel like, you know, that I would have been somewhere else if I had taken that path. And then my mom said something very noteworthy. She said, well, maybe you wouldn't be the writer you are today if you had taken that path. So I feel like I look back a lot, and you can find symbolism and themes in your life where it was leading you here. So as a pantser, I don't need to know ahead of time. I just have to look back and find meaning in what has already happened and use that to explain what's happening now and make something out of it. That's how I deal with it as a pantser. If there are symbolism, you will see me going back to a scene and then picking that scene out and explaining it that, oh, that happened and you didn't read. Readers loved it.
So you allow it to grow
people-
organically with your stories.
Yes, yes. And sometimes I didn't realize I did that either. And that's the most amazing thing, because when I look back, I said, wow, they actually said that. I didn't realize that's what they meant at the time. And then now I look back and that meant something, and it becomes this huge part. And readers who caught it or remember it, that's a really strong point about doing that, because sometimes readers, once they catch it, they go back and reread your entire book.
Right.
To catch
Absolutely.
more of those things. And so I've trained myself to really look back and bring back those elements around, sort of just to force them to reread the second time, the third
I
time.
like that. That's a good point. That's a good point. KL, did you have anything to add on this one before we move on?
With symbolic things, I tend to be more of a plotter than a pantser on that sort of thing. So I guess you do have some things that come up in a novel that maybe you didn't expect to. And one example, I have a dragon book, and I decided that royal dragons breathe blue flames and non-royals breathe yellow flames. I wrote it because I thought it was pretty. And I didn't really realize that the color of the flames would have a massive significance until a little bit later on, when a new thought occurred. And so I had to backtrack and kind of fill in that, okay, it actually has a meaning, that the different colored flames mean something. So I think you have little details that can pop up, even if you're mostly plotting things that, will slip into the story.
Like that. That's so true, because sometimes you don't even realize what's important until you go back and revise and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that
Exactly.
actually has some significance. So we had 2 questions come in about outlines, so I do want to touch on those. I'm going to read them both and then I will let you guys answer. Our first one is from Barbara. I found that people tend to have very different ideas of what an outline actually looks like, from simple bullet points to mega super detailed. So for those of you who outline, what do your outlines look like? And then on the same line of thinking, if I can find the comment again, from Stephen, what do you all typically use to structure an outline? What sections do you include and how detailed should they be? Would anybody like to kick us off with that one?
So I went and pulled some of my stuff.
Okay.
So I do like tables of wants versus needs. I have my little thing of what the characters are. I did my tarot pull and what the cards mean. And then my actual outline is just like bullet points per chapter. This is for a middle grade, so the chapters are fairly short. But
I think your audio may have cut out. It looks like, there we go.
so I did plot embryos, so the interior, exterior, and then the whole hero's journey. So I do those for more of my novel lengths, and then we'll do bullet points for each chapter as I go around the circle. So you have lots of them, and then you also have like the villains version of the hero journey where they don't make the change. And so the outline is where I can start slotting these embryos in together so that they're happening in a cohesive story. So it just depends.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for bringing the examples. I think I think it's really helpful, because it's one thing to hear about all of these different ways of planning, but it's another thing to actually see what it looks like on the page. So that's really helpful. Thank you, Laura. Would anyone else like to touch on how detailed our outlines are?
I can. First of all, I've never met 2 authors who outline exactly the same. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. There's ways that are best suited to the author. For me, I tend to bullet point general ideas, themes, notes that come into my head for a specific thing. Like you're writing a fight scene. Who's in the fight scene? Why are they fighting? And is there anything significant that happens in that fight? Or you're writing a romance scene. Who's in it? How detailed are you going to go? Is there anything specific that's said in that scene? I tend to write with two different pieces. One is my bullet pointed outline, and the other is kind of my series Bible of sorts, where I have family trees, the names of characters, and a few physical traits, like what are their eye colors, because I tend to forget that a lot. So with my little Bible, I can go, oh, he has green eyes, or he has blonde hair. Now, he hasn't been in the book for 3 books in some of my series, so it's really great to have that. And I find it really helpful to fill it out every time you create a new character, in case that character shows up in a later scene, especially if you're planning to write a long series. I also have maps done of my characters, and I've started commissioning some artwork that has been original artwork that's been done by some of my artists, which are being included in some of my special edition books. If you don't have the original artwork, or before I have it drawn, sometimes I'll find it helpful to go look for pictures of what some of the characters might kind of look like. Maybe he looks like Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise, and kind of put pictures up around my station to kind of inspire and remind me what I'm aiming to describe them as. I actually, I heard that idea of putting up the pictures from Anne Rice, who did something very similar by putting up pictures of settings and different people who inspired her characters or workplace. So I always thought that was a very cool idea from her. So I really, as to exact specific detail, I really think it's up to the author and how much you need and how rigid you want to be versus how creative you want to be, perhaps. But I definitely find that some of the Bible pieces, even if the map that you're drawing is just X's and circles, which a lot of my beginning ones were, I'm a terrible artist, so, or inspiration photos to kind of get a setting or a place, just anything that helps you visualize the scene or your characters, I find can really help in addition to the outline if you choose to outline.
I like that. That visualization element can really help a lot of people, definitely. Sienna, I know that you're a pantser, but do you have anything to add on this?
I have only a list of names that I've used already.
No, that's important though. I keep that as well, because sometimes if I have like side characters, I'll forget who I already gave a name to.
Yes, because I have a large cast, and so I need to write down. Sometimes I need to find names in advance, and then that's all the notes that I have. So I find it's really cool names, and then I write down, this is going to be the Jari's mother's name. This is going to be her last name, and I don't even cross some of those off, so I mess up too. I was so impressed with everybody's outlining with colors and charts, and I'm not even remotely as organized. The list of names I have is actually like on the note on my phone. That's it. It doesn't even include it.
Sometimes it's more about what's accessible to you. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. If there were, it wouldn't be a creative art, right? It would be more of a science. And so we can all kind of approach it in whatever way is best for us.
No, I think my life would have been easier if I had been more organized like you guys. I'm like really impressed. That's who I want to be. And I don't have the discipline to do it.
That is okay. All right, so we only have about 4 more minutes left, but I'll be in the Discord. I believe everybody here should be hanging around in the Discord. So if you guys have any other questions, we're more than happy to address them there. And I just want to give everybody a couple minutes if you want to just remind everybody of who you are again and where they can find you if you have any projects coming out. KL, if you want to start.
Sure. I primarily write dark fantasy, fantasy romance, and paranormal romance. My current projects that are coming up, I'm working on book 7 in my Black Rose Guard, which is an extremely dark fantasy series. I have a Rapunzel story that's coming out, which is adult fantasy romance, that's being co-written with Erin McFadden. And it's kind of a fun fairy tale adventure. We have a Red Riding Hood story. The books can be read, it's called Shattered Moonlight. They can be read together or separately, however you want. And I also have a vampire book coming out. I have 5 in my vampire series. They can be read together or as standalones as well. Each book follows a different vampire looking for his one true love. And I kind of play with different mythologies in that you have some witches, a selkie. You may or may not have a werewolf coming up in the next book, maybe. So it's a lot of supernatural creatures, fun romance, and fairy tales and dark fantasy. And so I have several projects coming out this year that I'm really excited about.
Awesome. Congratulations. That's so exciting. Laura?
Yes, I'm Laura Nettles. I mostly write horror. I have a collection of my stuff coming out called Tiny Shivers. Comes out May 9th. The ebook is up for pre-order right now. And it runs a gambit of subgenres. So cosmic slithers, terrors of the mundane, angels and demons, the seeping supernatural, twisted psychology, shadowy gothic, mutated sci-fi, and the ending is holiday food horror. So
I love that.
fun times.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. And Sienna?
I write right now. I'm writing grimdark fantasy, which is often called Game of Thrones set in the Middle East. So multiple point of views, 7 main characters, and very large cast. It's a series that that could go as long as the Wheel of Time. As a pantser, I have no idea when it's going to end. And because I have such a large cast, I really want to keep writing each, probably a book for each one of them, and a lot of prequels and standalones afterwards. So Obsidian, right, the first book is out. It's called Obsidian Awakening. The Obsidian series is what you will see me write for the next probably foreseeable future. I do write romance, paranormal romance, romantic comedy sometimes as well, but I usually don't publish those. Those are for fun. You will find those on web novel sites, on Wattpad, and fan fiction sites. I write a lot of fan fiction as well, but the only published work you will see from me in the foreseeable future is Obsidian.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of political fantasy, it's a grimdark political and a story mostly about humanity and all its flaws and the best things about them as well.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much. We are at time. I also just want to remind everybody, although KJ did have to leave, her link is in the chat along with all of ours. So if you want to connect with us, you can find all of our links down there. And thank you so much for coming.
This panel was originally part of the event Storycrafting Sessions Drafting. This was a virtual conference hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group, a social enterprise dedicated to providing accessible and affordable community and educational supports for writers. To find out more about the Weeknight Writers, go to businessforauthors.com/weeknight-writers. This event was also created in partnership with Renaissance Press, a small publisher dedicated to supporting diverse voices. You can check them out at pressesrenaissancepress.ca.